I call upon the first negative speaker, William Hambute.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairman, welcome to tonight's debate. As stated by the First Affirmative, the topic is that vaccine passports should be opposed. We, the negative team, entirely reject this statement. The affirmative team has proposed a definition that is largely correct, except we should add that instead of opposed being simply to disagree, we believe opposed to be actively deny the implementation of vaccination passports. Furthermore, we propose that a secure Australian vaccine passport would act as a digital and physical certificate that displays citizens' vaccination status, that is, fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated, or exempt. The passports would give citizens access to international and domestic travel and, according to Professor Salavasco, would provide fully vaccinated citizens greater freedoms during lockdowns and exemptions from restrictions. For instance, full access to business and employment, travel, and access to high-risk venues. Similarly, according to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Dan Tehan, high-risk industries could impose health certificate requirements for employees to reduce the risk of COVID-19 outbreaks. According to privacy expert Dr. Pike, privacy concerns could be mitigated by introducing randomised QR codes that only request basic information, being name and vaccination status, from secure federal databases. Furthermore, we reiterate that vaccination passports are a temporary measure, only to be enabled during the pandemic. Tonight, the negative team will prove three major themes. 1, vaccination passports are a legal and necessary element to post-COVID Australia. 2, that vaccine passports enable greater freedom. And 3, that there is an ethical responsibility to introduce them. As the first speaker tonight, I will establish the necessity to integrate vaccination passports and will address the legal precedent and its impact on the economy. Our second speaker, Sunny, will establish the ethical responsibility to introduce passports and the subsequent benefits on public health infrastructure. Our third speaker, Archer, will sum up and rebut. Before I begin my arguments, I will rebut the arguments made by the affirmative team. Firstly, the first affirmative implied that vaccination data would be given to the police force, which could be used to unlawfully track criminals. This is false, as under our model, it would be stored on a secure federal database that shares limited information to businesses and the government alike. Secondly, the first affirmative also stated that the current vaccination passport system is flawed and reveals too much information. To repeat, the domestic use of vaccination passports would and must be redeveloped to ensure the security and equality of access to citizens for all. Thirdly, the third affirmative stated that the vaccination and COVID information in translation was 8 months old. However, this data is understood to only be 8 weeks old. Now onto my first argument, that vaccine passports are a necessary public health measure. Firstly, according to Guardian reporter Anne Davies, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kerry Chant believes vaccine passports and proof of vaccination certificates are, quote, the only way out of the outbreak, going on to explain that New South Wales and other states should have, quote, proof of vaccination to enter high-risk venues, even when states reach 80% vaccination coverage. In fact, as Daniel Andrews revealed, bipartisan leaders from National Cabinet already, quote, commissioned states to do some further work around vaccine passports and what being vaccinated means for freedom and what not being vaccinated means from a rules point of view. Scott Morrison believes that vaccination certificates could provide, quote, a powerful incentive to be immunised, insisting that, quote, vaccine passports are the key to unrestricted domestic travel. Data from a Guardian Essential survey indicates that the majority of Australians would support rules requiring people to prove they are vaccinated before travelling interstate. And, this is key, 63% would back a requirement that people prove they are fully vaccinated before entering public venues like a restaurant. So, implementing vaccine certificates similar to our models is both a necessary and a popular element to post-COVID recovery. My second argument is that vaccine passports are both legally precedented and enable greater freedom for pro-vaccine citizens and businesses. Legally, a vaccine passport cannot be opposed, as Section 407 of the Biosecurity Act 2015 affords the Health Minister emergency provisions that allow the government to have the power to take any necessary measure to prevent and control the spread of COVID-19. And according to political reporter Tom Lowry, this includes, quote, the provisions of vaccine passports to citizens while in a state of emergency. He later added that the High Court supported these powers by, quote, rejecting a Melbourne business owner's claim that Victoria's lockdown restrictions infringed on an implied freedom of movement from the Constitution, and reiterates states, quote, ability to restrict the movement of any person or group of persons within the emergency area and give any other direction that the authorised officer considers is reasonably necessary to protect public health. In this case, any necessary measure could include the required use of vaccination passports. Further, under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, businesses have the right to deny patrons if they cannot prove they are vaccinated, and the right to, quote, require or request employees prove they are fully vaccinated, where businesses have, quote, the right to deny based on health-related factors. Secondly, Premier Berejiklian has foreshadowed that there is going to be, quote, a vaccinated economy, and you get to participate in that if you are vaccinated. Premier Andrews, in support, added that, quote, the economy as best it can will operate as close to normal as possible to people who have had 2 doses. Moreover, Chamber Chief Executive Paul Guerra stated, quote, vaccination certificates must be integrated with QR code check-in as a singular system to reduce the impost on business, and that technology should be rolled out as soon as such a scheme commences. These schemes would introduce relaxed restrictions that would enable vaccinated citizens full and stable access to businesses and an end to hard lockdowns nationwide. In late August, The Guardian reported that 60% of the population, or 16 million people across 3 states, were in some of the world's harshest lockdown conditions. Through the use of vaccine passports, some 43% of lockdown citizens, or 6.8 million citizens, would return to loosened level 1 or 2 restrictions and would have full access to workplaces and businesses. In fact, in Israel, the BBC commented that vaccination passport schemes were scrapped early this year after infection rates plummeted by a highly effective and direct use of the scheme. Moreover, Israel's economy grew by 15.6% in the second quarter after the passports kick-started the economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, vaccine passports are a highly popular and necessary element to Australia's COVID-19 recovery plan that cannot be opposed on legal grounds. Thank you.
I now call upon the second affirmative speaker, Kate Dosperson.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kate, and as the second affirmative speaker, I will be arguing that vaccine passports should be opposed due to several reasons for the safety of the general community. First, I will begin by pointing out the blatant flaws in the opposition's argument. The opposition repetitively suggested a secure federal database in which the medical records would be kept. This same supposedly secure federal database has faced several data breaches within recent years, which I will go on to explain further in my argument. The opposition has also attempted to tell you that by implementing such vaccine passports, it can allow for greater freedom for those vaccinated. One of the main problems with vaccine passports is that it assumes that getting a vaccine prevents civilians from acquiring COVID-19, which is not at all true. Getting a COVID-19 vaccine does not prevent hospitalization due to COVID-19, but it does prevent hospitalization, but it does not stop people from acquiring the disease. This means that people who do get vaccinated can still get COVID-19. They are just less likely to transmit the virus than people who are not vaccinated. Hence, vaccine passports may give people a false sense of security. It is true that vaccination provides some protection against catching COVID, but is not 100% efficient and effective in 100% of individuals. And what is more important is that we do not have enough evidence to say that vaccination prevents people from transmitting the disease to others. So while vaccination certainly reduces risk, both to the individual and across population, issuing passports that divide us into such black and white binary categories and controlling that what we do, where we can go, on a basis of whether we've been vaccinated does not seem to be justified. In fact, giving people a passport to say that they are safe might actually produce a false sense of security that could result in further spread of the disease. Therefore, vaccination passports should be opposed. The opposition has also tried to tell you that by implementing these vaccine passports, it will incentivize people to get vaccinated. However, the World Health Organization states that the national authorities and conveyance operators should not introduce requirements for proof of COVID-19 vaccination for international travel as a condition for departure or entry, given that there are still critical unknowns regarding the efficiency of vaccination in reducing transmission. Another reason cited by WHO is that this idea could lead to inequality and unfairness with regard to access to vaccines, considering the current limit on the global supply, as the first speaker has already mentioned in their speech. Therefore, vaccination passports should again be opposed. The first negative speaker has tried to tell you that translated vaccine information is only 8 weeks out of date, without providing a source to prove his statement. In comparison to our source of ABC News, which states 8 months. Furthermore, the negative team has failed to disclose that 8 weeks out of date is actually good enough, because it is in fact not good enough. As of 8 weeks ago, the Australian vaccination rollout was completely different to how it is now, and still proves that language speakers will have less idea than native English speakers, proving discrimination. Our first speaker has discussed the violation to a person's privacy that is caused by the implementation of vaccine passports, as well as the discrimination against citizens due to their vaccination status or other circumstances. As the second speaker, I will be solidifying our team's argument by expressing how vaccine passports are unnecessary and forgeable, and the potential fraud due to the unsafe documentation of these vaccine passports. Our third speaker will finally rebut the opposition's arguments and sum up our overall team case. To begin with my points, firstly, vaccine passports are an unnecessary risk. As our first speaker has already discussed, vaccine passports are a threat to the common privacy of the general public. But not only do they open up this risk, they are also unnecessary to be implemented in the first place. There is already a system in place to attempt to lessen the spread of COVID-19, which is far more effective. This is a forced quarantine for 14 days and a test taken at various times throughout the quarantine period. According to Oxford University, under their Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, given that the conditions for quarantine are met for 14 days and that the person in quarantine tests negative in all COVID tests, the spread should be prevented, making this measure against the COVID-19 spread entirely effective. The enforcement of vaccine passports for COVID-19 basically disallows any who are unvaccinated due to many circumstances from leaving the country. We propose that rather than strip the unvaccinated or anyone who does not wish to disclose their vaccination record of their ability to travel at all, they must be willing to quarantine for 14 days. For Oxford University's recommended period of 14 days, as well as provide negative tests for all COVID-19 tests. This is not a new measure, and it has proven successful in several cases, particularly South Australia, which has not faced a serious outbreak for a reasonable amount of time while still accepting international travellers, many of which actually test positive while in quarantine. This will prevent the unnecessary division of communities in a time when these communities should be standing united. It will open up the opportunity for more options outside of getting vaccinated, while still ensuring the safety of all others. Vaccine passports would eliminate this choice and should therefore be opposed. Additionally, mostly in terms of the online documents or vaccine passports, they are often prone to fraud, as it's quite easy to create false versions. This means that they are in fact less effective and reliable than quarantine and more prone to failing to reduce the spread. If someone were to, for example, forge the verification of vaccination, then be able to travel without quarantine, it is likely that the spread will only continue. The potential for this occurring is evidenced through past examples, particularly where an e-forensics expert named Richard Nelson exploited a pathway through the Medicare app to alter a vaccine passport and create his own method of proving flaws in the system. The attempts of Mr. Nelson were successful, demonstrating how these documents were unreliable due to their ability to be easily forged in under 10 minutes. Therefore, it would be ineffective to replace quarantine with forced evidence of vaccination, as proposed by the governments wishing to implement vaccine passports. Finally, vaccination passports are typically stored on a database, which consequently increases the risk of identity theft. From the vaccination cards that people are posting online to the PDF that sent to those who have received the COVID-19 vaccine, there is too much information that risks stolen identity and fraud of such. The opposition attempted to tell you that it was just simple things such as age and verification of receiving the vaccine. However, as evidenced by a statement by the US Federal Trade Commission that announced that people should not post evidence of their vaccination on social media, such as their vaccine card, because it displays their full name and date of birth, as well as quite often where their vaccine was received. This invites identity theft. Even the government admits there is too much information on these vaccine documents, so why should people trust whoever and not know who must see their vaccine passports with such delicate personal information just to travel, especially online, which is prone to hacking and other data breaches that could release the information on these cards, which, as I mentioned, the Federal Trade Commission admitted invites theft of identity. Back in early 2020, the Australian government was hit with a data breach in the financial sector, as well as the official government emails, with significant personal data leaked. Many other countries, such as the US, with one of the most secure systems, faced a data breach, which released much personal information. Why should this risk be taken? So to summarize, vaccine passports are a flawed and risk-prone replacement for a far more reliable system that is already in place, carelessly hoped to be implemented for simply the convenience of many, though I have discussed it is far more effective to quarantine. The vaccine passports are also in a digitalized area and therefore cannot be trusted to stay safe. So vaccine passports should be opposed. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Sunny Lee.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our tonight, as repeated multiple times, is that vaccine passports should be opposed. As already stated by our first negative speaker, William, our team firmly disagrees with this statement. But before I begin my arguments, I'd like to rebut some of the opposition's points. The first and the second had similar trains of thought in which they thought the vaccine status is mandated to be confidential by the Privacy Act. However, as said by first speaker William, the Biosecurity Act of 2015, Rule 407, allows the health minister in times of crisis, like the COVID-19 pandemic, to override federal laws like the Privacy Act to ensure public health. Furthermore, like I'll later explain, your right to do anything you want is limited when your choice poses threat to the greater community. The first also said that unvaccinated people will have to disclose their entire medical history to restaurants, per se. Not only is this a fallacy, it's also a slippery slope. This is illogical because the only medical information that would be given under our model is simply the vaccination status, much different to the person's entire medical history.
The second affirmative also said it was easy to forge passports. However, this is wrong, as there's multiple ways of securing the passport. Like our model has stated, we can use randomized QR codes on chain-linked or daisy-linked databases that move information securely. Or like the EU has done, a paper card that is given multiple features to prevent copying, as well as displaying the only information being vaccination status. Now, for tonight's topic, I'll be discussing the ethically sound implementation of vaccine passport and its relation to public health. There are three schools of thought I'll be discussing tonight, being utilitarianism, Mills-Harm's principle, and the duty to safe rescue. Furthermore, I'll be proving that vaccine passports have no ethical qualms, granted the system, like our model, is designed appropriately in accordance with recommendations from organisations such as those set by the Australian Human Rights Commission. So, Australia could minimise the bad or impacts of COVID-19 by implementing vaccine passports to safely provide a less stringent alternative to reopening the country. As I'll later discuss in my argument for public health, vaccine passports hold importance as a public health measure that could reduce the spread of COVID-19 infection. According to Ruth Macklin, an American philosopher and professor of bioethics, requiring health workers, for instance, to have certificates reduces the possibility of infecting unvaccinated patients with whom they come in contact. The same is true for those places where the virus is spread easily, such as universities, gyms, and assembly lines. Thus, in a utilitarian sense, we can easily minimize the risk posed by COVID-19 by requiring certification of vaccination, and subsequently benefiting the most people, whilst also mitigating damage done to those who cannot have the vaccine. Secondly, the harm principle says people should be free to act however they wish, unless their actions cause harm to somebody else. Applying this principle to vaccine passports dictates that people are to not unnecessarily harm others by having a certificate. Professor Arthur Schaefer, the founding director of the Center for Professional and Applied Ethics at the University of Manitoba, as well as being an expert to the federal government's vaccine passport panel, corroborates with the statement, if your choice poses risk to others, it may be legitimate for society to limit your liberty. Mill's harm principle, the most freedom-respecting framework we have for thinking about this question, clearly shows that requiring vaccine passports would not violate any individual rights that a well-ordered society would choose to defend. And because they would save so many lives and speed our return to normal life, we can ethically implement vaccine passports. Thirdly, the duty to easy rescue dictates that if it's of low personal cost and the rescue is of little to no difficulty, one is ethically obligated to rescue. According to Practical Ethics, an ethics-based blog written by various members of the philosophy faculty from the University of Oxford, as a society, we have a collective duty of easy rescue. For instance, if each person in the population who was eligible could donate a few milliliters of blood easily, and collectively this would solve the blood supply shortage, then each person ought to donate a few milliliters of blood. Doing so would literally be life-saving at no cost and minimal discomfort to the donors. Therefore, the relatively small group of people who are unable to have vaccinations for health reasons, and thus at risk, can be protected easily by the slight discomfort of the greater community. We also reiterate that those exempt should still be given a form of passport that indicates their medical exemption, and that this should not be a basis for refusing them access to events or venues, as outlined by our first speaker. In fact, as with vaccination in general, the existence of those exempted groups makes it even more important than those of us who can get vaccinated to do so, to protect the whole community. Julian Savulescu, an Australian philosopher and bioethicist, says, "It is unethical to require someone to avoid contact with others if they pose no or minimal risk of spreading the virus. More than simply helping to reopen the economy, vaccination passports provide a way to allow those who have had to shield during the pandemic and may have experienced social isolation or loneliness to have social contact with other members of society without fear. They will also facilitate access to care homes to allow for ease of visitation for families who have been separated for far too long. As members of a society, it is our moral obligation to get vaccinated to protect everyone in our community. Vaccination passports will help with this and enhance quality of life and well-being as we return to normal daily life." Now, to my final point. Vaccine passports are an effective mechanism in ensuring public health and a potentially viable way of alleviating the stress placed upon medical infrastructure. New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard called the Delta strain a gold medalist high jumper, obviously for its extremely infectious behaviour. As we all know, the pandemic has both damaged our economy and stressed our medical infrastructure. Thus, as a country, containing the virus and restoring the nation to a pre-COVID holistic state is one of our top priorities. Vaccine passports will support the safe reopening of Australia's international borders by digitally providing COVID-19 vaccination details, as said by Minister of Home Affairs Karen Andrews. This quote displays the government's support of the passport and how important it is in relation to public health. Furthermore, medical experts such as Kerry Chan cite its importance as a public health measure that could reduce the spread of COVID-19 infection. For instance, requiring health workers to have certificates reduces the possibility of infecting unvaccinated patients with whom they come in contact. But furthermore, this can also apply to places such as entertainment and recreational centres and assembly lines. Additionally, vaccine passports have already been implemented within SA to promote public health, as seen through the Adelaide Hills Winery Bird in Hand, which requires patrons to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. This allows business owners to protect patrons and staff who do not have adequate protection, and subsequently improving our net health. Therefore, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we the negative team agree with the implementation of vaccination passports in the interest of public health and ethical obligation. Vaccination passports will provide a safe and viable way of returning our country to a pre-COVID normalcy, whilst protecting those who are susceptible to COVID-19. Thank you.
I now call upon the third affirmative speaker, Ria Shiju.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that vaccine passports should be opposed, and we, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. I'm sure you've heard this topic numerous times, so I'm not going to keep boring you with the details of it. With millions of people receiving COVID-19 vaccines globally, some countries have already started planning the implementation of vaccine passports, accessible certificates confirming COVID-19 vaccination linked to the holder's identity. The purpose of the vaccine passports, governments argue, is to allow people to travel, attend large gatherings, access public venues, and return to work without compromising personal safety and public health. There remain, however, considerable practical and ethical challenges to their implementation. The hope is that vaccine passports will pave the way for economic recovery and restore people's freedom, as the opposition has clearly mentioned. But is it evidence-based? And does it violate people's right to choose? As a third speaker, I will begin by rebutting some of the claims made by the opposition. The first speaker has tried to tell you that by implementing such vaccine passports, it could significantly aid the economy. This is an interesting claim. COVID-19 has resulted in considerable slack in the economy, and current macroeconomics policies are appropriately focused on stimulating demand and supporting employment. However, the economy was weak pre-pandemic, and some of the medium-term challenges that it faced, such as weak productivity growth, are likely to be relevant post-pandemic. As the recovery progresses, these issues also deserve attention to ensure we ultimately return to a stronger economy. Therefore, vaccination passports should be opposed. The first negative speaker has also tried to tell you that by implementing vaccine passports, it will allow for more freedom for the people vaccinated. However, as our second speaker stated, one of the main problems with vaccine passports is that it assumes that COVID vaccination completely prevents people from catching COVID, which we know not to be the case. You can still get COVID-19 even if you are vaccinated. but the chances of you transmitting it are less, that's all. Furthermore, this could mean that vaccine passport holders are provided with a false sense of security, and this security could lead people to spread the COVID-19 vaccine more. And an example of this would be in America. The second negative speaker has tried to tell you that people should not unnecessarily harm each other in the context of the fact that they're using utilitarian law, to suggest that people, I'll just drop that one. The second negative speaker has also tried to tell you that if few people were to donate a couple of milliliters of blood, they'll be able to contribute a greater good to society. However, this is not the case because I have never donated blood, and I'm pretty sure most of the people in the room haven't donated blood. So just because we have the opportunity to do something good doesn't necessarily mean we'll take it all of the time, because we're selfish people. The opposition has also tried to tell you, the second speaker has also tried to tell you that by implementing such vaccine passports, these passports could also offer opportunities in terms of international travel. However, one of the main problems is that there's no consistent model or method in which to regulate it, because each different country has different systems and we've not all agreed on a uniform system. So it's just confusion all the time. And even if they did propose the current model that they're offering, the government is not following the model that they're offering. So that's just kind of contradictory. Doesn't make sense. For example, in France, they have health passes, but in the EU, they have an app in which they have a certificate that you follow to get the COVID vaccine. So, COVID vaccination certificate. But yeah. So there's different versions in different countries, so it's just a whole bunch of confusion. And this is not including considerations for some vaccines being more effective than others. So would you consider Pfizer being more effective? Is Pfizer the most effective one? Or is Moderna? Or is it Sinovac? Are we just categorizing them as well? Do we have to list which vaccine we took? It's a genuine question. So are we discriminating against people who have Pfizer then? Because are we giving them more benefits than other people? How's that going to work, Yeah, so the opposition continuously measures their model of effective implementation of vaccine passports. However, the model that they unfortunately used differs greatly from the model proposed by the government, which is documentation of vaccination currently in action, which presents far too much personal information. And you can cite my mother because she has the vaccine. So, yeah. I will now summarise the points made by my team. Today, the first speaker has spoken about the many privacy issues that vaccine passports can create and how all Australians are entitled to their legal right of maintaining confidentiality in regard to their medical records. Additionally, she has also mentioned the many intricacies regarding vaccine passports within Australia and within the world, as current vaccine passports are being issued by separate jurisdictions and how that could lead to discrimination. Our second speaker, has spoken about how vaccine passports are an unnecessary risk, as we allegedly have a quarantining system. As we have a quarantining system in place for those entering from abroad. Additionally, she spoke about how ambiguous the definition of vaccine passport is. Any standardised piece of documentation, it can be easily forged, and how even the Australian government can fall victim to data breaches. As a third speaker, I have rebut and summed up our team case. The conversation we should be having is not about whether or not vaccine passports should be adopted, but rather about what rules should be set to make sure any passport regime advances the goals of public health, reopening society and advancing a return to ordinary life for everyone in a manner that is as equitable as possible. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Archer Loney.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should oppose vaccine passports. As a member of the negative team, I believe this statement to be false and that vaccine passports have great merit and are of great use to Australia. As the third speaker, I will rebut and counter the arguments of the affirmative team before summarising my own team's arguments. The opposition has claimed that there are significant privacy concerns with regard to the government and police accessing medical records through the use of vaccine passports. This is a false concern, as there are plenty of solutions to this issue. Under the definition of a passport, actually both definitions provided by both our team and the affirmative team, the law regarding vaccine passports could include specific terms to ensure privacy is not breached, as with current government measures and safeguards. These include the deletion of data after 14 days in regards to where people have signed in, the data transparency and purpose limitations of the data, and for it to allow for non-digital options. The Australian Human Rights Commission also believes that with such restrictions, the introduction of a vaccine passport system would not be a privacy concern to all Australians. With this in mind, privacy concerns raised are largely negligible, as the issue is either non-existent or solved by established precedent. The opposition has also claimed that the introduction of a vaccine passport system will result in discrimination against groups who statistically are harder for the government to reach. Specifically, they use the example of Aboriginal Australians. According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, as long as these groups, or any other group with difficulty accessing the vaccine, are given exemption status until the vaccine is readily available for everyone, the realistic danger of discrimination is very low. In addition, the government has also made determined efforts to ensure equal access to vaccines within a lot of these groups. And combined, this means that the vaccine passport system should not be opposed on the basis of discrimination, given it is so easily addressed. The first affirmative speaker talked about how under a vaccine passport, immunocompromised people would have to disclose detailed medical records regarding their ailment. This is false, as under our model, these people would be granted exemptions not detailing the specifics, and under the opposition's definition, there is no reason why such a law to prevent a detailed medical history needing to be presented wouldn't be necessary. The second affirmative speaker discussed how we already have a system to control the influx of foreigners and between states, which is quarantine. This is wrong, as it's not wrong, but it's ineffective, as it severely hampers the ability of people to move around, particularly for jobs that require travel. In addition, it also prevents people from seeing families across the border by requiring them to take 4 weeks of quarantine, 2 crossing into a state and 2 crossing back out of it. The second affirmative also mentioned that getting a vaccine is not entirely effective against COVID-19 and could create a mentality of safety that will cause an increase in cases. This is false and demonstrated by Israel, where the implementation of vaccine passports saw an incredible decrease in the number of cases over an extended period of time. The second and third affirmative speakers talked about about how vaccine passports are easily forged. This is a false argument, given that we have not actually implemented proper vaccine passports. The actual passports would be significantly more complex, such as a randomised QR code or specialised cards akin to the current driver's licence or actual passports for international travel. The third affirmative speaker also brought up that we should oppose vaccine passports because the economy will still face issues, even if vaccine passports address the current issues facing the economy. The economy has significantly worsened during COVID. Pretty sure no one can deny that. By returning the economy to its pre-pandemic state using vaccine passports, we can focus on fixing those already prevalent issues rather than wasting the time of our economists and our politicians in fixing the issues of the pandemic economy, which could be solved by the implementation of vaccine passports. To start the summary of my team's arguments, our first speaker began by outlining our model for the debate, including the restrictions and freedoms possibly placed on passport holders. His first argument discussed the necessity of vaccine passports as a public health measure, quoting various different politicians from across the spectrum, as well as outlining the currently under development passports for international travel. His second argument discussed the legality of vaccine passports and the greater freedoms achievable through their implementation. He mentioned the powers granted to the government under the 2015 Biosecurity Act, as well as the right to refuse business for health-related reasons under the Work Health and Safety Act of 2011. He then discussed how vaccine passports would enable the economy to return to nearly to normalcy, while reducing the threat to public health as much as physically possible and retaining an open economy. Our second speaker's first argument discussed three different ethical principles: utilitarianism, Mills harms principle, and the duty to easy rescue. He outlines how, if the government follows recommendations from the Australian Human Rights Commission, there would be next to no ethical issues, as otherwise refusing would be detrimental to the health of the public, and therefore unethical under the above principles. His second argument discussed how the implementation of a vaccine passport system would be beneficial to public health. He discussed how by ensuring that unvaccinated individuals, who are significantly more infectious than vaccinated individuals, as shown by multiple clinical studies, are prevented from spending excessive time in social situations, particularly in crowded areas such as universities, nightclubs, restaurants, or other social gatherings, meaning the chance of another outbreak within Australia is kept to an absolute minimum, and therefore the risk to public health is also minimised. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, vaccine passports are necessary for the immediate future of Australia. In order to protect public health and ensure the continued opening of the economy and of the country, we need vaccine passports. With correct implementation, there are no valid ethical, security, or legal issues. We need vaccine passports. Thank you.
We now come to question time. For the next 3 minutes, teams are invited to take turns to ask each other questions about the debate. That is, the affirmative team will ask a question, then the negative team, then the affirmative team, and so on. A team is free to indicate it if it has no questions. I now invite the affirmative team to ask its first question.
Yeah.
So you continuously bring up how, well, at least you mentioned at some point that we haven't got vaccine passports yet. However, under our definition, which you agree to, it's like basically verification that someone has been vaccinated to travel. So wouldn't these documents be the same as that, just added into a passport to show they can travel? Or do you have like something to add to that?
I think Dan Tehan from the Ministry for Tourism and Transport said that they were developing a new vaccine passport system, and that whilst there was a one in the Medicare app, this one would be linked via QR code to your passport via a secure system. How is your mother a reliable source?
I was just using it as a joke. I didn't think you'd take it that seriously. A question about the law. The law that you said that would allow for you guys to use the vaccine passports according to the health minister, like
The Biosecurity Act.
The
Yeah.
Biosecurity Act,
Yeah. Why? Where? When?
So in 2015, the Biosecurity Act was passed, which basically gave the health minister, during an emergency situation, the right to more or less override any federal government law.
Including the Privacy Act.
Yeah.
But from what I saw, actually, I actually read something that was as of 2021 that the Privacy Act cannot be overridden by the Biosecurity Act in terms of employers. So it, in some sense, yes, it can override the Privacy Act, but not all of it.
Wait, could you
Okay.
say?
Is there specific provisions that prevent this amount of information that would be in relation to vaccine passports that can't be accessed by the federal government in relation to the Privacy Act?
Hang on, say it again.
Sorry, so you are claiming that some provisions of the Privacy Act cannot be overridden
Yeah.
by the
Which one in
provisions in
particular? Yeah, I said in terms of employers legally cannot enforce, cannot, like the Biosecurity Act. It's with employers.
Yeah, so that would be like when you go to like a restaurant or something, or like when you're employed by
Your
by a
employer
restaurant.
cannot legally force you to show your vaccination passport, and they legally cannot ask you about your vaccination status, unless there are obviously like health related industries. But other than that, unless it's like outlined by the government, the Privacy Act ensures that employers can't.
Time's over.
We had so many questions, so
Why is it always happening just that?
I should have asked any of the other ones.
How was your
Well,
mother?
look,
How was your mother? A reliable source, guys. This is primary evidence.
If you've got the times, I'd love to see them.
Right.
And then there's some notes. I believe there's notes.
Chairman's notices, you can read those?
While the adjudicators finalise the result, I will read this evening's chairman's notices. So Year 10 and Senior, would you like to be an adjudicator for primary school debates in 2022? Adjudicating is great opportunity service and it will help to improve your own debating. See the information desk for more information about how to sign up. Winning team sides, please see draw sheet for debate number. We're delighted that the grand finals will be held in the House of Assembly Chamber, Parliament House on Saturday 25th of September 2021. Parliament House has advised that we need to collect RSVPs for attendance. An online RSVP form is available on our website. There is a formal security screening process to enter Parliament House. To avoid delays in start time, please allow plenty of time to arrive and give priority entry to debaters and adjudicators. The grand finals list will be the winner from each of these debates tonight. Award presentations, all grand finalists, today's winning teams, will be invited to the award presentations to be held on Friday, 29th of October 2021, 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. at Sacred Heart College, Marcelin Campus Senior School. Further information will be sent to schools shortly. I invite a representative of the adjudication panel to come forward to announce the result.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mr. Baker. I'm representing the adjudicating panel this evening. Tonight is a three-panel adjudication, which means that unlike a normal debate where we would give you some feedback about this, each adjudicator has come to their result differently and independently. And so the feedback that I might provide to one team and even potentially the result that I provide to one team may be very different from the others, and so we won't be doing that. This was a fantastic debate, and once again we'd like to thank you all for coming and your support. Without further ado, I can announce tonight that in a split decision of 2-1, the negative team has won. Congratulations.
I call upon a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
I'd like to thank I'd like to thank the chairperson, the timekeeper, and the wonderfully large audience, as well as the adjudicators for coming in, and the opposition for giving us a really fun debate. So thank you.
I call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
First, I'd like to thank obviously the opposition for a very good debate tonight. I'd also like to thank the audience for coming and for the adjudicators for taking the time out of their night to adjudicate the debate. And I'd also like to thank Nazareth for hosting the debate, as well as Debating SA for organising it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.
Yes, miss.